So you would argue that these programs, that the welfare state and whatever incarnation it is today, does not in fact help poor people in the long run. But what would you say to those today who advocate for an expansion of public health funding for children, expansion of education funding, expansion of food stamps or other programs? What do you say to them when there is right now in our economy such a sad face of immediate economic need?
Well, I would start right off by asking for evidence that all the previous spending has been successful. Take education spending. Since the years that the federal government got involved, the mid-60s, education performance has at best been flat, and in a lot of places been driven to appallingly low levels. So there's no evidence that the previous massive spending by government in these areas actually has helped. And a lot of evidence that in fact it has underwritten bureaucracy and poor performance. So I don't think throwing more money by bureaucrats, spending other people's money, is really going to solve a lot of these problems. There's no evidence that it will.
Mason, let's talk about higher education. We were just talking about education. What's going on now with our colleges? We've seen these tremendous increases in tuition, and meanwhile we see salaries for top administrators that are also going up. What do you think our government needs to do to make education affordable, or should that even be a goal of government?
Well, it shouldn't be a direct goal of government, but one of the main factors, I think, in the upward spiral of cost of education is inflation. It's just a reflection of the decline of the purchasing power of our currency. And you see it in so many areas, whether housing or price of oil or gas, where just the dollar purchases far less than it has before. So some of the price rise is just an illusion, actually, that the same dollars you had before don't buy as much anymore. But what the government should do in education is get out of the education business. They should stop subsidizing stop subsidizing education at higher levels and in the lower levels as well. It creates an enormous distortion in the market for education. And we can go into that further if you'd like. It's a long...
What are your thoughts there?
Well, some years ago, a group I was involved with did a comprehensive study of higher education, and particularly what's happened to the teacher preparation curriculum. What are we doing when it comes to preparing teachers at the college level to go into being teachers at the K-12 level? And it's appalling what's happened under government intervention since the mid-60s. The unions have come to dominate curricula. We've seen an erosion of things like a core curricula. Teachers aren't being prepared quite often to teach the very subjects that ultimately they'll be in the classroom teaching. There's been a serious erosion in the quality of things like teacher education, teacher preparation, since the federal government got involved in this. So I think education, the more it is local and locally run, the more responsive, the more accountable, the more competitive it's going to be. And throwing more money at it from distant bureaucracies in Washington is not a solution. It's infantile to think it can fix the problem.
Here in Colorado, we have a situation where our higher education institutions are facing a collective cut of up to $500 million. These are serious economic concerns. But at the Independence Institute, we've been looking into the fact that our university administrators are receiving exorbitant salaries, some up to $700,000, $800,000 for university administrators, including chancellors. And what we hear from the university is that they need to keep up, that there's this, what Richard Vedder, who's another economist, calls the academic arms race, where CU needs to compete with the University of Michigan or the University of Virginia, and to do that, it has to have these salaries. But when it comes to public institutions, is there any hope that the federal government could step in and somehow tie federal funding of institutions to a commitment to have salary caps? After all, we have salary caps on Wall Street, and it would seem that if you shake hands with the devil, that you should be willing to take whatever terms the devil's going to give you. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't see the federal government as properly in the business of telling schools or universities what their salaries ought to be. What we need to do is to subject them to the discipline of the marketplace rather than the discipline of politicians telling them what they should be paid. The fact is, if these salaries would not likely be excessive if those universities couldn't depend upon the annual appropriation process of politicians taking other people's money to give to them. If they had to rely upon customers My guess is they'd be more in line with what they ought to be instead of being so politically determined.
Well, in Colorado, we have, take the University of Colorado, for instance, where every state dollar is met with $2 in federal funding. The University of Colorado receives nearly $1 billion in federal funding. So in this reality where the federal government, maybe not in an ideal world, but in reality, is funding so much of higher education, does it become the appropriate role of government to step in and say, if you're going to take federal funding, then you need to stop paying these salaries that, at least in my humble opinion, the market wouldn't otherwise bear? What are your thoughts, Mason?
My thoughts are no. They should not get any further involved than they already are. And as Larry was pointing out, the root cause of the problem is the government subsidy towards its education in the first place. If that were removed, you'd see the problem disappear. So when we see that the root cause is federal government intervention in the first place, I wouldn't prescribe any further involvement at all.
But have we gotten too far down that road?
We've definitely gotten too far down that road, but never too far to take a step back. How do you make the political argument, or how does it become politically feasible to remove the federal government's arm in public institutions of higher ed? Well, we have to continue on an educational level teaching the ideas of freedom and liberty, that it is wrong for government to take our money and to send it where they want to send it. And whenever they do that, it will result in wildly distorted results in the marketplace.
I think you can point to private universities, of which there are many all over the country. And the pay of administrators there is not an issue, and if you think that administrator salaries at private schools are too high, at least you're not paying for it. You can patronize another one. So it's not an issue there. It's only an issue in universities where they've been tapping the public trough for so many years.
And let's talk now. You taught at the University of Midland, is that right?
No, it's Northwood University.
In Midland.
In Midland,
okay.
yes.
And you taught
Midland,
economics, but you don't have a PhD, and many people would say in the modern academy that makes you completely unqualified. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of folks who would look at the degree behind your name, perhaps, although I do have 2 honorary ones, but as a judge of what you can do. But I think there are a lot of private schools that say, look, we're more interested in what can the person actually accomplish in the classroom. There are people who are Nobel laureates who are unqualified, if you go by the standard procedure of state certification, unqualified to teach in the classroom because I don't have an education degree. So what I'm saying is it's more important to look at what is the person capable of doing in the classroom. And sometimes having that degree past your name is not an indication of how well a person can succeed as a teacher.
And one last question about education. It's my area of interest, and I tend to get stuck there a lot. But here in Colorado, we had a notorious professor named Churchill. You may have heard of him.
Yes, I have.
He faked his ethnicity, claiming he was American Indian. He was caught for plagiarizing, academic retaliation against students. The list went on, and he just won a case against the university for wrongful termination, claiming that his firing was a pretext, or that the claims of academic misconduct were a pretext for the actual reason he was fired, which is that he was expressing anti-American sentiment. Now, his case aside, we had a political environment here where people were very frustrated at our institutions. We had national voices, including David Horowitz, come in and call for tenure reform, call for ending this lifetime job protection for professors. And we had a Republican, at least for the first couple years, Republican legislature, Republican governor, Republican Board of Regents at the University of Colorado, still could not get tenure reform on the books. So is it ever going to happen?